Over the course of the history in America that we've discussed in this class, mainstream Protestant Christian notions of who and what is sexually deviant have changed and evolved alongside secular notions of what is seen as sexually acceptable and what isn't. Also, notions of what is gender normative have slightly changed as our pluralistic society has evolved. A few overwhelmingly common themes that aid my argument are notions of othered men being labeled as sexually deviant. These are usually either non-Protestant and or non-white men or new Protestants such as Mormons, Shakers, and Onitans, and the idea that good Christian, white females are easily swayed off the proper Christian path by these othered male deviants. In week 2 of the course, we read Things Too Fearful to Name and learned about bestiality in colonial America, which was obviously seen as wrong by Christians because of wasteful penetration and because the animals were not human women. We discussed how there are many quotations from the Bible that Christians use to condemn acts of penetration as unethical and morally wrong, and penetrating an animal is among those sinful acts. Next, we read The Awful Disclosures of Maria Monk, which is a forged tell-all that Protestant pastors wrote under the name of a real woman, Maria Monk, in the 19th century. There was already a growing anti-Catholic sentiment in the country at the time, and the book tells of priests raping nuns and then murdering the children that resulted from those rapes. I believe the most important theme I can take for my arguments from this reading is how Protestants thought it unnatural for Catholic men to be celibate. Once a Protestant read the book, it would probably make him believe that because these men have suppressed their sexuality and do not marry women, their sexual urges boil over and cause them to commit sinful acts of rape against the nuns at their disposal. 1 Corinthians 7:9 states, "But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn." So the act of abstinence itself is a form of sexual deviance according to Protestants at the time. Also, in the Maria Monk reading, the notion of women being so easily corrupted is there. In the reading, she has a chance to escape the deviant Catholics, yet she returns once escaping. When we moved into the sexuality of new Protestants, such as the Onitans, Shakers, and Mormons, mainstream Protestant Christians had huge problems with their sexuality for multiple reasons. These 3 new Protestant groups had new notions of what was sexually acceptable. We read in The Virgin Life how Shakers believe in celibacy because they believe that Jesus has already made his second coming, so there was no reason to bring new life into the world. We can already see how many other Protestants would find this sexually deviant because of the verse in Corinthians that I just read. In Male Continence, written by John Humphrey Noyes, we learned how the Onitans believed that it was good for their followers to have sex with multiple partners as long as the male did not ejaculate. This control over himself that a man would exhibit in such sexual situations was thought by Onitans to be a godly act, but Christians having multiple sex partners was obviously appalling to mainstream Christians who believed that sex was only okay between a heterosexual male and his wife. Then in the City of Joseph, we read about how Joseph Smith was practicing pluralistic marriage, marrying multiple of his female followers, which, once again, mainstream Christians were not okay with because they were only allowed one wife. Next, we move into colonialist Christians' interpretation of Native American sexuality and gender norms in the late 19th century in Zuni Man-Woman. The book follows the life of Weewa and the Zuni's understanding of sexuality and gender norms. The colonialists didn't understand whether or not to call Weewa a man or woman because Weewa took on female gender roles while having male genitalia. They called these men women birdoshes and certainly thought that the malleable gender roles were deviant. We learned that the Zunis were very open about sexuality and did not bestow gender pronouns upon their children until they knew what gender roles the child preferred, despite what genitalia the child was born with. Christians in the country at the time were only comfortable with their gender binary of male and female, and they bestowed gender on their children at birth according to the genitalia each child had. Also, at this period in history, American Christians were not at all very open about sex, so were probably shocked at witnessing the openness of Zuni sexuality. Next, we read Take the Young Stranger by the Hand, which dealt with Christian male relationships in the YMCA and the issue of sexual attraction to the same sex and challenged untraditional gender roles. The YMCA was created to cause young Christian men to be as manly as possible, yet sort of backfired on the association's goal. The homosexual relationships which sprouted in the atmosphere of these close male bonds once again brings up the issue of gender roles when you think about the act of penetration. At this time, the belief by most Christians was that a male does the penetrating, he cannot be penetrated. Homosexuality was then and now considered deviant by Christians, although, as we shall see, Christians eventually blur the line on who is allowed to penetrate who, as we read in Christians Under Covers. Next, we read Unclean Lips, which delves into the history of obscenity distribution being tied to male Jews in the 20th century. Anti-Semitism had an influence on anti-obscenity laws. Jews participated in obscenity distribution, pornography, etc., because they couldn't get a lot of jobs due to the rampant anti-Semitism in the country at the time. So they distributed obscenity for the same reason that non-Jews did, because they wanted to make money, get sexual gratification, etc. Even though people who were not Jewish were also distributing pornography, Christians found a way to blame Jews for being sexually perverse. We've talked a lot throughout the course about how Christians generally do not accept viewing pornography as normal sexual behavior. Matthew 5:27-28 states, "You have heard that it was said, 'Do not commit adultery.' But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to desire her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Next we read The Heathen Invasion and The Great Ohm, both about yoga in the early 20th century. Mabel Potter Daggett argues in The Heathen Invasion that yogis coming from India were swaying otherwise good Christian women off the proper path by promising eternal youth, among other things, with their pagan yogic rituals. We also read how Pierre Bernard was accused by his female followers of hypnotizing women to make them fall in love with him. Even the women who practiced yoga with him seemed to believe that they were gullible and easily molded themselves. Next, we started to see how evangelicals were adapting their notions of what was sexually acceptable and out of the mouths of babes, which followed evangelical girls in the flapper era. The girls would dress like flappers to proselytize to men, yet still shook their heads at everything else the flappers were doing. Revivalism allowed new interpretations of Scripture, which allowed these young evangelicals to at least dress like flappers. Finally, we read Christians Undercovers, which revealed the internet as a new frontier for evangelicals to explore their sexuality in the 21st century. The book illustrates how evangelical women have turned to the internet to find out how they can enjoy sex with their husbands, since they generally do not have an outlet in their church or social groups. The final chapter we read was the most shocking to me because of the rules of penetration that we discussed throughout the course. Until this final reading, we have seen penetration as only being an act that a male can perform on his wife. Yet the reading delves into how some evangelical males have excused the act of pegging, their wives penetrating them, by claiming that as long as their wives and God know that they are heterosexual, the act of a female penetrating a male, an ultimate gender switch, is just fine. In conclusion, it is pretty interesting how who and what is considered normal or deviant in their sexuality and gender by Christians throughout the history we've discussed. Christians have stuck by the truth claims they've held onto for centuries, and the arguments they've posed against certain sexual acts remain. Yet these arguments are malleable and changing as Christianity grows alongside secular culture in America.